In this lesson, I want to offer a review of the Workbooks.Open method, which opens another workbook, and the path property on a single workbook object, which tells us the path or the file location of a given file. So what I want to do here is write a basic macro that's going to offer a different workbook than the one we're in. I'm currently in a file called the Workbooks object, and in the exact same directory, I have another Excel file called Report.XLSM, and I want to go ahead and open it here, as well as talk about some of the quirks or problems you might run into whenever attempting such an operation. So what I'm going to do here is create a procedure called open some file. And I believe there was actually a challenge earlier that you tackled where you had to deal with this method, the open method on the Workbooks collection object. And sometimes when you're dealing with files in the exact same directory, if you simply give the name of the file you want to open, that's going to work sometimes. But sometimes Excel and VBA are known to run into an error where it's going to be unable to figure out exactly where the file that you want to open is located. And the only way to remedy that is to actually provide the full path. So the exact location on your computer where the file is located, even if it's in the exact same folder as the workbook is from which you're running the macro. So what we can do here is do a couple of tricks to find out the current location of this file, the one that we're in right now. And because we know the file that we're trying to open, which is report, is in the same directory, we can then concatenate that file name to our current directory to get the full path to the file that we want to open. It's a little bit of a confusing concept, but hopefully it'll make more sense as we type it out. So the first thing I want to do is actually get the current location of the file that we're in. So on any workbook object, we have a property called path, which is going to give us the exact directory or path to our current file. I can show you this in our immediate window. So as a reminder, the workbook that is currently open and selected is the active workbook, and this is a regular workbook object. And on that, we have a property called path. Path is going to give us the entire path to this file. So this file, the Workbooks object right here, is located within this directory structure. Notice that it doesn't actually give us the file name. It just gives us the path all the way to the current directory where the file is in. So what I can do is get access to this path in the context of my procedure and then concatenate on the name of my file that I want to open to the end of it. So here's how I can do something like that. I'll first declare a variable. I'm going to call it file path. And it is just going to represent a path, so it's going to be a string. And I can go ahead on the next line and assign it to what we just did in the immediate window, simply do the active workbook and get its path. So now I'm going to have this string assigned to the file path variable. On the next line, I can go ahead and try to open my report workbook. I'm eventually going to want to assign this to a variable, and the open method on the workbooks collection is actually going to return the open workbook to me as an object. Because I want to store that in a variable, I'm going to declare that workbook variable up front. So I'm going to do dim WB as a workbook. So now we're going to have a WB variable, and as a reminder, whenever we're assigning an object to a variable, rather than simply using the equal sign, we also have to use the set keyword. So I'm going to do set WB, and I'm going to set that equal to the open method on the workbooks collection. So as a reminder, the open method on the workbooks collection is going to open a brand new workbook, and then it's going to return a single workbook object to me, which I then want to assign to the WB variable, and then we're going to have access to it and can do all kinds of things to it. So here's where it gets tricky. Right here, we talked about this method a little bit previously. We have the first argument, which is a file name. It's expecting the actual name. And sometimes if you were to do simply something like report.xlsm, it's not guaranteed to work. So the best thing that we can do here is prefix this or prepend it with the full directory. So the way we can do that is like this. Right here before, I'm actually going to write file path, which is going to give me the exact path, the directory to where I am. But there's one more thing we have to do, two more things actually. The first, of course, is that we have to concatenate. We have to add on report.xlsm to the end. And you'll also notice here that if I were to simply take this and paste it right at the end, we're not exactly going to get what we want, because we actually need to place an additional slash in order to indicate that we're actually in that directory. So the path is going to give us the directory that we're in, but it's not going to add that last slash. So we have to add it manually right here before report. And now we're going to tell VBA, get the current file path, which is this thing right here. And then to the end of it, you want to concatenate this slash. And then report.xlsm, we have to make sure we close that open method call. As another reminder, we have to do parentheses whenever we're going to assign the return value of a method to a variable. So that's why we're using the parentheses for the open method. And this is just the first argument right here. We're just providing this concatenated string to represent the file path. All right, so that should do it. WB is now going to store the report workbook, assuming that it's been properly opened, and we can verify this by doing something like this. We can say message box, you've just opened, and to this we can concatenate something like WB.name. Our report workbook will now have a name, and we can also alert the user to its path of our newly opened workbook, rather. So we can do the same path property that we saw earlier. We can say the file location of what you just opened is, and we're going to concatenate to the end of that WB.Path. The exact same path property that I applied to the active workbook, we're now just getting that property off the workbook that we just opened, which is going to be report.xlsm. All right, so let's go ahead and see if this works. I'm going to save this and press F5 to execute. All right, and there we see report.xlsm open. This is just a random file. You can see we have this message box pop up. You've just opened report.xlsm. That's coming from our very first message box. This is getting the name property of this workbook. And then OK, and now we can see the file location of what you just opened is right here. This is using the path property of this new Excel workbook that we just opened. So just to clarify, the name and the path properties that we just used are coming from this report workbook that we just opened. They're not coming from this application object workbook where we actually wrote our macro code. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and press OK, and that's it. That's all there is to cover in this lesson. We did a quick review of the open method on the workbooks collection object, as well as the path property on a workbook. The open method is used to open a brand new workbook. In fact, you can do much more complex operations like open every single workbook in a given directory on the computer. That's a much more complex operation, but you can sort of imagine the kind of scenario where this might be helpful. Perhaps you're going to have a directory of, let's say, revenue reports, one for every month of the year, and you want to iterate or go through each one of them, open them up one by one, and perform the exact same process in each. That's the kind of scenario where you might need to open a workbook, and that open method will help you do that. All right, that's all there is to cover here, so I'll see you in the next lesson.